Okay, this is going to be a demonstration of my nutrition plan, and it's found in my Excel file. I've named it All's Well Diet. Okay, so basically we're looking at what foods there are. Those are the same colors going across. And on top it gives categories such as calories, carbs, fats, proteins, fiber, and over in this part where there's the lighter green, this is where most of the handling is done. So I would switch these numbers around as per how I was changing the quantities. So notice if I change this 1 to a 2, where it says 50 to the left in the blue column and 68 to the right, it will now change to the quantities per one serving, and that's 38 grams of protein powder and so on. So the main goal of doing this sort of thing for me is to make sure that I have something like 50 to 60% carbs and something like my body weight in protein, which is closer to 217. So I'll go back. So this is running me closer to 217. And some points, well, again, this is where the values are, and the rest of the column actually handles it, I guess would be a better way of looking at it. You handle the program yourself from here by switching these numbers, and then you come over to take a look at what's being handled. So if it's 4 grams per serving, then it's 4 grams now times the number in that green or G column, G6 in this case. It's peanut butter on row 6, and so forth and so on. So some things to take into account are how many calories you have. Is it a certain number that you're aiming for right away? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you could make a few different patterns like this that meet your carb requirements and meet your protein requirements. Typically fat will be dealt with if you have a proper type of food list, and I'll go over that in a second. Okay, so basically all my foods, because I'm vegan, are peanut butter, legumes. They're all very healthy foods on their own. They don't pack a lot of salt or sugar. They're not overly processed and that sort of thing. So what I mean by addressing this is just that you wouldn't put a whole bunch of candy in here and expect to get all your protein. You wouldn't put a specific protein bar unless you were going to stick to that protein bar. And usually that's pretty expensive, so I suggest against it. And that brings me to my next point. If it's too expensive, then it doesn't fit your budget, which I have highlighted here. Per day, it's about $19.64. And I am handling exactly how pricey this is getting on the right over here. This is talking about the same foods, hemp and protein, and it's taking that number in the G column, or maybe H column as per quantity, and dealing with just exactly how much it is priced. So in this case, protein powder is a certain amount, H5, and it's going to be 68. So 68 divided by 32 is exactly 2, and then 2 multiplied by 2.06, that's $2.06, is $4.12, which makes its way down the column on top of every other type of food like this to $16.60, which fits my budget of $19.64. So this fortunately works. And what I find with this is that the higher the calorie, typically if you're substituting in proper foods like this, the price will usually go down at a certain point. Usually it's about 4,000 calories. Above that, maybe 4,500 calories, the price will start to go down because you start to use cheaper foods to get to your macro goals of protein and carbs. And a couple other points are that you don't want to go too far in your fiber. That's why I have it handled over here. Just what the limit is, 78 is the limit, and that's based on the 1,000 calorie per, so that's 14 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. And in this case of 55 some odd hundred calories, it's 78, and it says fiber at 77. So I'm okay because it's a little bit within that window. So this is important because if you eat too much fiber, it really can give you a stomach ache. It really feels like you have not drunk enough water or something, and you can really feel things moving around, and I really suggest not going higher than this. Anyway, it can be very awful if you have too much fiber. And so that's pretty much it. I've had bad experiences. Just to linger here for a moment, just for the sake of joy, You really do not want to have too much fiber. It is awful. I mean, you could be working and you really just want to be lying straight down, stomach up in the air. Anyway, okay. So when I'm talking about other things, I mean, beyond that, it's not that critical. Just, like they say, don't eat too much sugar, don't eat too much salt, and that sort of thing. So back to salt, though, there is a certain amount of salt, and it's typically sodium. We'll measure it with milligrams of sodium per calorie. So let's say I have 5,500 calories for real. Well, half of that is about 2,750, and that would be in milligrams of sodium. And what that might actually look like by itself is about 1.4 grams of salt equal about 530. So I just mentioned a number close to kind of 5 times that. So 5 times that 1.4 gram of salt, which I can do right here just absolutely for fun. This is just to show how Excel works. I don't use an X for multiplication. It's this star. And then I just press OK. And that's 7 straight grams of salt per day. And I would only do this if you thought that you're going to break even with the amount of activity. Otherwise, you just kind of have as much salt and as much water as you would for the day's worth of activity. So if you're trying to gain weight, my suggestion is just to drink enough water like you normally would. And as for water, typically it's the same amount of calories as per milliliters of water. So 5.5 liters would be it for 5,500 calories. And I guess I can't really go too much further here with what I'm saying, but if you were only going to say try to put on the 500 extra calories that day, you'd have the 5 liters and you'd have a corresponding amount of salt. And another complicating matter in all of these numbers is how much salt is actually already in your food. And you can look that up. You can check out your protein powder, and sometimes it will tell you that you have, well, it will tell you definitely if you have a certain amount of sodium in there. And I actually have it handled down here, whereas there's already a hefty amount of sodium in this. And so what is it? And see how these two numbers add closely to 7, and that's typically what you'd see then. And well, it is exactly what you'd see from what I've described. So because so much of it is handled with that protein powder, just such a great amount, you have 2.64 for the salt remaining. I didn't put any calculations down here. That was just something I had figured out and just made a note of in this program. But of course, you could keep going like this. You could keep this as a running loop and have it as an equation, whereas it handled exactly how much you needed. So just to think about what exactly the goals are and which numbers you need to access, which cells exactly they are in. For example, if I want to refer back to exactly how many calories there are, then I come back here. And that's important when it comes to the percentage of calories, which are found out by carbs being about 4 calories per gram, fats being about 9 calories per gram, and proteins about, again, 4 calories per gram. And then you figure out the percentage you have based on this and your final number. So you will have to refer to this cell, which is, as you can see if you look straight up and to the left as well, it's B14. And when I go down here, it says B14 in each of these cases. And hopefully I don't change anything by moving around. Typically you don't want to touch anything too much in this program because it could just change on you. It doesn't hurt to do a little bit of back checking. But I find that this will make sure that everything you're looking for is in your budget and you have the right sorts of foods you need every day. You can add new types of foods on top of it. And it's just a really manageable way to do it. And what I'm doing right now myself is just having a different sheet for every type of calorie range. So if I wanted a 3,000, then I have one ready. If I wanted a 3,500, it's ready, and on by 500 to something like 6,000, which might happen because it gets very warm in the summertime here in Canada. And that's pretty much it. So here's my nutrition plan. I'm not sure I can say too much more about it. And yeah, you could keep going with Excel and saving these sorts of things. So save a plan, make a little list of exactly what those figures were over here with your quantities of foods, which is found over here. So I put grams or liters, and I guess I'll just kind of meditate on what points there are to have here. Of course, you want a kitchen scale because you want to be able to measure this particularly, or if you are a little braver, you could just use a cup or trust the little scooper on the protein can. It might tell you something fairly accurate, and you might be able to eyeball a certain amount of peanut butter in a tablespoon, or you might be able to eyeball half a cup of beans or a certain amount of rice. If you have a measuring cup or something like that, you could see if that's quite similar. You might want to chat GPT, or you might want to research just exactly how that works out. Dry rice and trying to see if you have the exact quantity in a measuring cup. I'm not too sure that that's exactly right on. Okay, and that would be it. Thanks for listening. This one is just to highlight how it can be complex to figure out just exactly how much quantity of which category of thing, like food. If it's peanut butter, for example, the fat is going to be much higher than it is for protein powder, and I'm just making that as a point. And of course, some foods are more expensive than others, so it's also something, I mean, I've already mentioned that you want to watch the price, but just to consider that this one was very carefully picked with the foods. So, for example, peanut butter is a very high calorie food and it's very high in protein. Not very high actually in protein, but moderately high in carbs and very high in fat. Legumes, for example, or beans, they have a lot of fiber, so that's a hard one to get in there if you want to sneak in your protein in a cheap way. And they also have lots of carbs too. So they have high carbs, high protein, and the kind of downfall is high fiber, I find. And another note is that there are 400 grams of veggies and fruit kind of fixed here on these two rows. Dried rice is good for lots of carbs with very little fiber, and it has a very low amount of protein, but it's still significant enough to add up. And that's pretty much it, just to consider how to add up and think about these numbers as you go. And it might be a little bit easier than something like AI, in that AI is just a very quick rendition of what you could have for a day. If you were to ask it some question that had a fairly complex result like I'm describing here, you'd want to see for yourself that all the math worked, because the way it works right now with AI, it's not actually adding the numbers up, and I'll ask it over and over to do it, but it doesn't. So, I mean, it'll say, not quite in these terms, that 1 + 1 is 3 or something like that over and over for you. So, anyway, this is the end of the video, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Okay, thank you.